As if I knew that the readings this morning would present difficult texts, I had insisted with Father Johnson that some other priest would preach today. Any of them who had been detailed to preach during this Mass, so that I also listen and be fed. Now in the sacristy, we're going I'm sure not children. Because somewhere go you teach you no game now. But the texts, both of the first reading and the gospel, they are complicated, and it's difficult to know exactly what to underline for our reflection. But I'll just pick out one. Faith. The transforming power of faith in God. And I'm not going to give you any dogmatic reflection or lecture on faith. Many of you are dogmatic theologians. No matter philosophy. We create more problems than we can solve. It is just a question of sharing experiences about faith. Yesterday, the readings were on prayer, the gospel especially. And they are all based on faith, our relationship with God. A relationship that is so intimate that it has no space for doubts, or rather, not really doubts, but question on the fidelity of the person, God himself, in whom we believe. The conclusion of Paul in his discussion with the Galatians is, look, it is our faith that makes us children of Abraham, not any physical exercise. But that faith is a power of God, that the finger of God that Jesus talks about, that has power over natural and spiritual forces. A testimony about the power of faith. I believe in the power of prayer, personally. Formal, informal, attentive, distracted, especially the Eucharist. No man, Father Johnson, not your phone here since last night. And as he arrived this morning, as Nakanaka, so Father Pauline Johnson, be my chokoma phone somewhere, not the sacristy. As we were moving into the sacristy, it struck me, we have not asked St. Anthony. I said a silent prayer to St. Anthony. And immediately I stopped. So Johnson, did you use the toilet yesterday? I said, yes. He went straight to the toilet and found his phone. Went straight to the toilet and found his phone. When some of us insist on correcting some of these abuses or these theatricals and deceptions on our people used to make money, they say we have no faith. That is not faith. What we experience in many of these things is not faith, because it is putting God as if he was somebody you could manipulate. As we were going last night, I was reflecting with Father Johnson on my difficulty in explaining how prayer works. When I shared it with him, he reminded me that the same thing St. Thomas also said about prayer. You don't need to read St. Thomas to arrive at the conclusions of St. Thomas. If you have the same faith as St. Thomas and have the same rigor of thinking as St. Thomas, you arrive at the same conclusions. And I used modern technology to explain my understanding of prayer. I want to share it with you. I don't believe that prayer changes God's mind. I don't believe, no matter how anthropomorphic we can be in describing it, that God really behaves as some of us. That's our way of understanding him. I compare God's action in our life with regard to prayers as with the performance of a transistor radio or even a television, anything, or even your telephone sets. Your handsets are here, our radios are elsewhere. If you tune the radio, you receive transmission. It is not the radio that brings the transmission. The waves are already there. But for you to receive those transmissions, the transistor radio has to be there. It has to have a battery or source of energy. You have to turn it on and begin to look for the exact frequency that you are interested in. Battery I don't do, and the radio has to be good. And sometimes the difference between one frequency and another is so marginal that you have to tune and retune and tune and retune, especially now in the age of FM, until you get what you are looking for. I regard prayer as tuning to the frequency that makes the blessing that God has set already for you available to you. Your radio has to be there. It has to have batteries. But you have to do the tuning. If the waves were not there, or if anything blocks the waves, no amount of fidgeting with the radio will bring in those signals. So I believe that God already, before the creation of the world, as Paul says, predestined us. He chose us for himself and mapped out more than enough of what we need in our life. But will you then establish such a frequency in relationship with him that at the giving time you receive what you need spiritually, physically, morally? It is not an easy exercise, because getting the radio ready, making the battery always alive, being patient enough to tune, those are also the things that mortifications do for us, sacrifices, good works. Those are all parts, as far as I'm concerned, of tuning to the frequency of faith to receive waves that are already there for you. But why is it then that I receive this and he receives the other? Because he tuned BBC with a BBC. Only tuned VOA with a VOA. There is no way you will put your frequency in FM and on soccer and expect BBC to come in. It won't work now. So this is my own analysis. And that also has to do with the relationship with God with regard to his powers over the forces of nature, spiritual forces. By the way, I always remind people, casting out demons in the name of Christ or even in any other name is the least of the miracles a believer can perform. The least. And it's very dangerous. Why do I say it is very dangerous? I always use Matthew chapter 7 from verse 22. Not all those who say to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom, but those who do the will of my Father. Because on that day some will come and say, did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not perform miracles in your name? Yes, the name is not yours. But you are not within that frequency of absolute trust and love that makes him walk through you and in you, and you become a continuation of his presence. This is what I understand. Otherwise, those who were casting out demons, we are doing it even before Christ came. Your own experts, in whose name do they cast them out? And we read in the Acts of the Apostles the same thing. People, there were exorcists who were itinerant exorcists who confronted the apostles and wanted to imitate them. We know how some of them ended up the funny story of the man, the sons of Seva, I think, or Sheva, who wanted to command an evil spirit. Okay? I sabi Jesus. I sabi Paul. Who you be? Paul I know. Jesus I know. But you, who are you? And then they dealt with those guys. Yes, man, in the midst of poverty, our people have been made to believe that once you have power over evil spirits, you are a holy man. And it is because you are a holy man that is happening in your life. And then we have created these holy priests and unholy priests. Some of us who may be doing those things are faithless people. And why do I say faithless people? So long as economies are the center of all these exercises, you have not even believed that God will take care of your life. And so long as even you don't understand that God can talk to you through your superiors, you mean you haven't even trusted him enough. Look at the life of the saints. Saint Pio of Petricina, for instance. I always tell people who are gifted, one of the things that God will use to test your faith is obedience. Because when you have gifts, you will receive very difficult instructions from your superiors. And once you disobey, Satan will say, welcome to our club. But that's the act of faith. So with Paul, I would say it is faith. And this faith is not as simple as we think it is. It's not just the type of rational assent to a set of revelations. It is an attitude that one makes us so immersed in the person of God, in the Trinity, that we believe that where he leads us is right. And if you have that attitude, there is no limit to what can happen in your life and through your life in other people's lives. These are very, very difficult times, brothers and sisters, for the world and for the church. Everywhere. Where you are in Europe, basic assumptions of our faith are now being questioned. In the name of inclusiveness, in the name of synodality, in the name of anything, people no longer know what we believe and what we don't believe. And you ask yourself whether the Catholic priesthood or religious life still means anything. Of course, the question even about gender, so-called gender, it's not even as simple as you think it is. Because if a person doesn't believe in the existence of God who assigns nature, how will the person then accept male and female, male or female? This is the crisis the world is facing. And in our context, poverty compounds the problem. Our people are so poor and so gullible, and bad governance increases poverty. And once I always say that bad governance and prosperity gospel or abuse of religion, they need each other. Bad governance feeds the relevance of bad religion, and bad religion needs the support of bad governance to remain credible. That is the situation we are in now. But then, we are ministers of God's mercy. We are ministers of God's intervention in the lives of people. And the finger of God, each of us is a finger of God, so long as we are immersed in him in faith, become so much part of him in our lives that we become extension of his presence among our brothers and sisters. And look, if you have that, you cannot be discouraged by your failures, and you cannot be puffed up by your so-called successes. So it's my prayer for all of us that the gift of the Holy Spirit, whom we invoke in this Mass, will strengthen us and unite us more with the Blessed Trinity, in such a way that our faith becomes so consolidated that, like Paul will say, no longer I, but Christ living and acting in me.